The wind howled down Main Street, rattling the windows of Dee's Diner as the neon open sign flickered to life. It was 6:45 a.m. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and grease filled the air, mixing with the sound of clinking dishes and murmured greetings from the regulars trickling in. Dee's was one of those old-school joints. Chrome-edged countertops, sticky laminated menus, and red vinyl booths with duct tape holding the seams together. For most folks in the sleepy town of Marlow, it was where mornings began. Strong coffee, bad jokes, and scrambled eggs, served with a side of gossip. Behind the counter, Kelly was wiping down the glass cake dome. She was in her mid-20s, sharp-tongued and quick with a sarcastic eye roll. The kind of waitress who knew everyone's order but rarely remembered to smile. That's when the bell over the door jingled, and in stepped a man most of them had seen before, but never really looked at. He shuffled in slowly, each step deliberate, as though the air itself weighed more for him than anyone else. His coat was several sizes too big, sleeves swallowing his hands. Dirt clung to the hem of his jeans, and his shoes looked like they'd barely survived the winter. His beard was gray, tangled, and his eyes, though sunken, were startlingly kind. He didn't say much, just gave a polite nod to the nearest booth and headed to the farthest corner. A few heads turned. No one smiled. Kelly glanced up and sighed, loud enough for two customers at the counter to hear. "Ugh, here we go again." One of them, a middle-aged man in a construction vest, chuckled. "Guess the morning just got more aromatic." Thomas, though no one there bothered to remember his name, reached the corner booth and sat down gently, placing a crumpled hat on the table. He stared at the menu for a few seconds, then fumbled through his pocket, pulling out a handful of coins, mostly nickels and dimes. Kelly approached, notepad in hand, though it was clear she wasn't thrilled about it. "You planning to order something, or just taking up space?" Thomas looked up, startled, then smiled softly. "I was hoping I could get a small coffee, and maybe just a plain toast. I think I've got enough." He started counting, stacking coins carefully in little uneven towers. His hands trembled, not from cold but age, or maybe a deeper struggle. Kelly didn't even look at the coins. She scoffed. "We're not a soup kitchen, you know." A hush fell over the nearest tables. No one stepped in. A few patrons exchanged glances, uncomfortable but silent. Thomas blinked, his smile fading. I didn't mean to be a bother. I just thought—" "You thought wrong," she interrupted, tapping her notepad with the edge of her pen like she couldn't wait to move on. "Minimum order's $6. You're not even close." He looked down at the table, slowly sliding the coins back into his pocket. "Sorry, I'll go." Kelly crossed her arms. "Whatever." As Thomas began to rise, something in his coat shifted. A photograph slipped out from the inside pocket and fluttered to the floor. He didn't notice, but Kelly did. She bent down to pick it up. It was old, faded. Two men in army fatigues smiling in a dusty field. One of them was unmistakably younger Thomas, clean-shaven, standing tall, a medal on his chest. The other man wore a captain's insignia. Kelly glanced at it for a second too long, then dropped it face down on the table. Right. War hero. Everyone's got a story. Thomas picked up the photo gently, dusted it off with trembling fingers, and tucked it back into his coat. No rebuttal, no lecture, just quiet dignity. The bell above the door jingled again. No one noticed right away, too focused on the awkwardness that had just settled into the room like smoke. But Kelly's eyes shot toward the entrance and widened. A sleek black SUV had parked right outside, engine still running. The man who entered wore a tailored coat and polished shoes that had clearly never walked a muddy alley. He moved with the kind of calm confidence you only earned after commanding rooms and owning them. He didn't ask to be seated. He didn't wait to be greeted. His eyes scanned the room once, just once, and locked onto Thomas. Without a word, he walked straight to the corner booth. Thomas looked up in surprise as the man smiled warmly. "Sorry I'm late," he said. And then he sat down across from the homeless man like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mouths hung open, forks froze halfway to mouths. Even Kelly, mid-eye roll, stopped cold. Thomas blinked. I wasn't sure you'd come." The man chuckled. "Of course I came." He waved down Kelly without looking at her. "2 breakfasts, full order, and coffee, black. Thanks." Kelly stuttered. Yes, of course. Right away." She turned away, her face suddenly drained of all sarcasm. People whispered, Phones subtly lifted under the table. The tide in Dee's diner had just turned, and no one yet knew just how far it would go. The silence in Dee's diner could have been sliced with a butter knife. No one touched their food. No one spoke above a whisper. Everyone's eyes darted toward the booth in the back. The booth that moments ago had housed a man they barely tolerated. Now, that same man sat face to face with someone who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. Kelly moved like a machine, barely making eye contact as she poured 2 coffees and placed the cups on their table. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. She could feel the weight of the room shift with every step. The suited man offered her a courteous nod. "Thank you." She managed a stiff smile. "Will that be all for now, sir?" He looked at Thomas. "Anything else you want, my friend?" Thomas hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "No, this is more than enough." "Then that's all for now," the man said kindly, before turning his attention back to Thomas. Kelly lingered a beat too long, as if trying to piece together the scene unfolding before her. But then she caught the man's glance and quickly turned away. The billionaire leaned back in the booth, wrapping his hands around the coffee cup like he wasn't surrounded by a dozen stunned onlookers. Like this moment, this exact reunion, had been written into his day long before the sun had even risen. "You look like hell, Tom," he said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But I've never been happier to see anyone in my life." Thomas chuckled under his breath, still unsure if this was real or some vivid dream formed from 1,000 cold nights on park benches. "It's been a long road." The man nodded, then looked down for a moment, like there was a weight in his chest too heavy for even his expensive suit to hide. "I thought you were gone." "I almost was," Thomas admitted. "Twice." That single line made the man go quiet. He stirred his coffee slowly, almost absent-mindedly. The steam rose between them, framing their reunion in a fog of shared history. "You saved my life, Tom. Twice. And then disappeared off the face of the earth. For years I looked." Thomas gave a slow nod, eyes down. "I didn't want to be found." The man shook his head. "You didn't deserve this." He gestured lightly toward the coat, the calloused hands, the half-eaten life. Thomas looked out the window, voice low. "A lot of us don't get what we deserve. You know that." There was pain in that sentence, not bitterness, but acceptance, the quiet kind that comes after the noise has settled and the world has forgotten your name. The man leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." "Please." Thomas took a long sip of coffee before answering. "After the second tour, I came back different. You remember, PTSD, the meds, the night sweats. I tried holding a job, lost 2 in the first year. Marriage didn't survive the third, lost the house, then the truck. After a while, you stop calling friends back. You stop looking people in the eye. And then one day, you wake up on a bench, and it just feels normal." The man didn't interrupt. He didn't blink. "Why didn't you reach out?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Because I knew you'd come running," Thomas said with a half smile. "And I didn't want to be your pity project. You had a company to run. You were on magazine covers. Why would I drag you into my failure?" The billionaire blinked hard, swallowing something heavy in his throat. "You weren't a failure, Tom. The world failed you. I failed you." At a nearby table, one of the younger waiters pretended to clean a salt shaker while eavesdropping. Kelly leaned against the counter, arms crossed, face pale. The mood in the diner had shifted from curiosity to guilt. "I still remember that day in Kandahar," the man continued. "When that Humvee hit the IED, you didn't even think. You pulled me out, took the shrapnel yourself." Thomas shrugged. "You would have done the same for me." The man leaned forward, voice steady now. "I did more than just survive because of you. That moment, that debt, it's never been repaid. You gave me a second chance at life. Everything I built, every contract, every boardroom I walked into, I carried your name with me." Thomas blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm not letting you fade away in a corner booth," the man said firmly. "Not anymore." Their food arrived, stacked pancakes, scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and thick toast with real butter. Kelly placed the plates down carefully, this time avoiding eye contact entirely. The billionaire pulled out a black card and handed it to her. "Start a tab and feed everyone in this place." Kelly stared at the card like it burned her hand. "Everyone?" He nodded. "Everyone." A murmur rose through the diner. A few clapped quietly. Someone whispered, "Who is this guy?" As Kelly walked away, still dazed, Thomas looked down at the feast in front of him. His eyes began to water. "I can't repay you for this." "You already did," the man said simply. "Years ago, with your blood." They ate together in silence for a few minutes. Two old soldiers, one battle-scarred on the outside, the other scarred within. The warmth of the meal, the smell of fresh eggs, the hum of hushed voices, it all felt like a scene from someone else's life. But it was real, and soon the town would know just how real. By now, the diner was buzzing in quiet shock. People whispered behind coffee mugs, stealing glances at the man in the suit. Phones vibrated silently with texts like, "You seeing this?" and "Who the hell is that guy?" But no one dared break the atmosphere. Something about the conversation unfolding in that corner booth felt sacred. Kelly stood behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts, though her eyes kept darting toward Thomas and his sharply dressed guest. She'd known when she mocked that man, called him a freeloader, humiliated him, she hadn't done anything technically wrong. But now, standing under the weight of her own words, she wished she could take them all back. Across the booth, the billionaire wiped his mouth gently with a napkin and leaned forward, eyes clear, voice calm. "You know," he said, "I wasn't even supposed to be in this town today." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "I had meetings in D.C., lunch with 2 governors, and dinner with the board of my 3rd company. But last night, I couldn't sleep. Something kept tugging at me, a gut feeling." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin leather wallet. From it, he slid a folded photo across the table. It was the same photo Thomas had dropped earlier, the two of them younger, laughing in the sandstorm sun of Kandahar. "I looked at this, and I realized how much of my life I owed to a man I hadn't seen in a decade, a man who vanished without asking for thanks." Thomas stared at the photo, his weathered fingers trembling slightly. "And I thought," the billionaire continued, "if he's still out there, somewhere, I'd trade 1,000 meetings to shake his hand again." He paused. "And then I found you here, in this booth, treated like trash, by people who didn't know your name." Kelly flinched at the counter. So did the construction worker who'd made the aromatic joke earlier. The billionaire's voice didn't rise. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His words were scalpel precise. "This man," he said, turning toward the rest of the diner now, "dragged me out of a burning Humvee while bullets rained from every direction. He took a blast meant for me, bled out in a medic tent for 6 hours while I called his wife to tell her we didn't know if he'd make it." The room was silent, forks frozen midair, jaws slightly open. "He served this country with honor, and when he came home, you treated him like he didn't matter." He gestured to the room, not in accusation, but in painful truth. A man like this should never have to beg for toast. He shouldn't be asked if he can afford coffee. He shouldn't be judged by the dirt on his coat, but by the scars he earned defending yours. Now people looked away, not because they didn't care, but because they did. The weight of it was unbearable. The billionaire turned back to Thomas, then reached into his jacket once more. "Thomas Whitaker, as of this moment, you're no longer homeless. I've purchased a fully furnished apartment for you downtown. 2 bedrooms, stocked fridge, new clothes, new start. Keys are right here." He slid a key fob across the table. Thomas blinked. His throat bobbed as he swallowed emotion. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the man said gently. "You earned this a long time ago." But he wasn't done. "I've also set up a monthly pension account for you. Private, not charity. Consider it overdue hazard pay." Thomas raised a shaking hand to his face. The tears came silently, like a man who'd cried enough behind dumpsters and church basements and finally couldn't hold them anymore. "And one more thing," the billionaire added. He stood. The room tensed. He walked slowly toward the front of the diner, all eyes following him, and stopped just short of the counter where Kelly stood, pale-faced and wide-eyed. He placed a business card on the counter, sleek, embossed, with nothing but a name and number. "My name is Mason Hart," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "CEO of Hartwell Industries. Maybe you've heard of us." Kelly nodded stiffly. Everyone had. The company ran energy, infrastructure, and half the country's military logistics contracts. "I came in here quietly, looking for an old friend," he continued. What I found was a woman too arrogant to show compassion, too careless to recognize worth, and too smug to apologize even when she knew she was wrong. Kelly's lips parted to speak, but no sound came out. Mason's eyes didn't flinch. "I've just bought this diner." Gasps rippled across the floor. He continued, "I finalized the deal 20 minutes ago from my phone. Dee's Diner will be renovated, rebranded, and placed under new management, effective immediately." Kelly's jaw dropped. "You're firing me?" Mason tilted his head as if surprised by the question. "You fired yourself the moment you mocked a veteran for being poor." Then he looked toward Thomas, who was still seated, stunned, as every person in the diner slowly turned to look at him, not with disgust, but awe. A man near the counter stood and approached him. "Sir? I didn't know. I'm sorry." A young waitress placed a napkin by his coffee and said softly, "Thank you for your service." Another man, the one who'd laughed earlier, walked over and offered a firm handshake. "I was wrong. You didn't deserve that." One by one they came, quiet, humble, genuine. Thomas could hardly respond. He just nodded, each gesture smaller than the last, as emotion threatened to undo him. Mason returned to the booth and laid a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We're going to get you cleaned up," he said. "And then we're going to a VA center to get your meds sorted. You're not doing this alone anymore." Thomas wiped his eyes. "I can't believe this is real." Mason smiled. "It's real, and it's just the beginning." As they stood to leave, the entire diner seemed to rise with them, like gravity itself had shifted to follow this quiet man who no longer needed to hide in corners. The same bell above the door jingled as they walked out, but this time it didn't echo with judgment or silence. It rang with redemption, and for the first time in a long time, Thomas Whitaker walked through it, standing tall. 3 weeks had passed since that unforgettable morning at Dee's Diner. The building was still there. Same parking lot, same faded neon sign, but inside, everything had changed. The walls had been repainted in warm earth tones, the cracked booths replaced with polished oak and soft leather. A new name graced the front, Whitaker's Table. Where once a man had been humiliated for asking about toast, now his name welcomed guests through the door. Thomas Whitaker still came in early, 6 a.m. sharp, like clockwork. Old military habits die hard. He didn't come to eat alone anymore, though. He came in as part owner. Yes, owner. It was Mason Hart's idea. The billionaire had insisted on naming the diner after the man who inspired the change, and Thomas had reluctantly agreed on one condition. "If my name's on it, I work for it." So he did. Every morning, Thomas brewed coffee, wiped counters, and greeted customers with a quiet dignity that couldn't be faked. He wasn't looking for applause. He was building something. Again. Word had spread fast. Articles were written. A local TV segment aired. Veterans began stopping in on their way through town, often just to shake his hand or buy a cup of coffee they didn't need. One even said, "I drove 2 hours just to sit at your booth." Booth 9, now unofficially called the Hero's Seat. But Thomas didn't let it go to his head. His mornings were still quiet, still humble. He lived just 8 blocks away now, in a cozy brick apartment that overlooked the park, a far cry from the underpass where he used to sleep. On Sundays, he'd sit by the window and feed breadcrumbs to birds that landed on his sill. Sometimes Mason joined him. They didn't always talk much, just sat, comfortable in their earned silence. One morning, Kelly walked into Whitaker's Table, hesitant, eyes down. She wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a windbreaker, holding a small paper envelope. Thomas looked up from the register and gave her a nod. "Morning." "Hi," she said, voice shaky. "I wasn't sure if I should come back." Thomas motioned toward a seat at the counter. "You just did." She sat. There was a pause, long and necessary. "I wanted to say thank you," Kelly finally said, placing the envelope on the counter, "for not dragging me through the mud. You could have. I deserved it." Thomas didn't look at the envelope. He just poured her a coffee. Sometimes the best lessons stick harder when they're quiet. She swallowed a breath and pushed the envelope closer. "It's not much. Just a letter and the tip money I made at my new job. Thought maybe it could help feed someone who needs it." He finally looked at her, and his eyes, still tired, still kind, softened. "Thank you," he said simply. She left with mist in her eyes, and Thomas slid the envelope into the pay-it-forward jar near the register, the same jar Mason had started on opening day. Dozens of others had followed suit, offering prepaid meals for anyone who couldn't afford one. It was now the most full container in the building. Outside, a young couple walked by and paused at the door. The man pointed at the sign above and said, "That's the vet I told you about, the one from the diner story." They stepped inside, and Thomas greeted them with a small, quiet smile. Life had changed, yes, but not Thomas. He still walked like a man who had seen both heaven and hell, still carried himself like someone who understood that true dignity isn't worn, it's earned. One afternoon, a little boy, maybe 8 or 9, approached the counter with a wrinkled dollar and wide eyes. "You really saved a billionaire in the army?" he asked. Thomas chuckled. "I was just doing my job, kid." The boy grinned. "I want to be like you." Thomas leaned down and looked him in the eye. "Then remember one thing. You don't need money or medals to matter, just kindness and courage." The boy nodded as if it were gospel. Outside, the town had started to change too. More benches now had small bronze plaques honoring local veterans. A community shelter had been reopened with new funding, all sparked by one man's quiet redemption in a diner booth. And as the sun set each evening, the last thing the town would see was Whitaker's table glowing softly at the corner, a warm light spilling from the windows, a reminder that dignity can return, hearts can change, and sometimes, the man you overlook becomes the reason you open your eyes. If this story moved you, subscribe to Soulful Storytime for more real, powerful tales of redemption, kindness, and courage.